Have you ever wondered how your sales performance compares against your competitors and peers? The B2B Sales Benchmark Report provides the definitive guide to what success looks like in 2021. See how you compare in terms of win rate, sales cycle, average deal value, relationships, and engagement. You can see the results and get the full report at ebster.com/B2B-sales-benchmarks. This is Sales Ops Demystified, the #1 most downloaded podcast in sales operations. We invite the brightest minds in sales operations onto the show to deconstruct the why, what, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebster, the leading customer engagement platform for Salesforce. Welcome to a very special episode of Sales Operations Demystified podcast. In this room now, we have a grand total of 20 years sales operations experience from 10 different companies. So I'd like to introduce Nia, who is Global Head of Sales Operations at Jumio, and Catherine, who is Sales Operations Director at Ometria. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Thank you. So we've actually been trying to get Catherine and Nia onto this podcast for 4 months. Yeah. And so we're here. So first of all, thank you so much for your time. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting session because of the diverse or the number of businesses that you guys have experienced in. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, which is, how did you get in sales ops? And feel free to, whoever likes to go first.
Yeah, I'll start. So how did I get into sales ops? Right, so actually 11 years ago now, or 10 years ago, I applied for an internship at Microsoft. And I applied to work for the finance department. Mm-hmm. So I went through the whole assessment center, did 5 interviews for different departments. And they rejected me. They didn't want me to work for the finance department. So you can imagine I was absolutely upset.
Yeah.
So had to go back. Then they called me 2 days later and said, actually, we have a better role for you. We think that this particular role suits you much, much better. So which was actually the role of an education licensing specialist in the education team. So that particular role sat basically between the operations, sales, and enablement. So I was managing different programs, educational programs. I was training our sales people on the different educational programs we had, but also our resellers and distributors.
Yeah.
I was doing the whole operational side of things, looking at what does that process look like in terms of, who are we selling to, how are we working with our distributors and resellers, what does an entire sales process looks like, working with the operations center to really optimize that.
Yeah.
And I was doing numbers, understanding really what we're doing from an educational perspective. So although my role was education licensing specialist, that was my real taste in what sales operations was without knowing what sales operations actually was.
Yeah.
Right? So that was quite interesting.
A few patterns I see with these interviews is that no one really actually goes for a job at sales operations. Mm-hmm. And when they do get into the job that turns out to be sales operations, they don't know what it is. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's what happened with you.
Exactly.
So let's quickly go over and get Nia's origination story.
My start was slightly different. So I began my career in psychology, and I worked in psychology for about 4 or 5 years, I worked in the young offenders prison in Feltham, and then I got my first corporate role at Groupon. And I was learning about buying patterns, trying to understand the buying patterns of the consumers. Mm-hmm. And then I very quickly became more interested in the sales process and the process that drove a salesperson to make the sales. And I spent a lot of time working on the process. My area of expertise began with process, and looking at how we can make it more efficient, what we could do to improve it, And so, yeah, that's where I began.
From the people perspective, because of your background in psychology, like how can we make our salespeople sell more and this process sell more by looking at how you change or influence the people? So that sounds super interesting.
Definitely. And it's definitely helped me along the way. I always say when I get a bad salesperson, I've experienced working in a prison with other types of people, so this is nothing.
So we're going to get onto that later. And then you guys actually met working at Amazon?
Yes.
And was that in sales operations?
So I always explain this by saying sales operations, I think, even as a title being defined, has never really properly been defined. And so we actually worked in different departments, but doing different aspects of sales operations.
Yeah, so actually, at Amazon was the first time I had actually the title sales operation.
Cool.
That was my first time being a sales operations specialist, I think it was, or analyst even. And before that, I still did sales operations role, but I was never called that.
Yeah.
I was, sales excellence support or sales support or anything like that, right?
Even now, people are called business operations, revenue operations. Like
it's changing. I think it's evolving now, because I feel like sales operations came first, and now it's being, now it's revenue operations. Now you have biz ops as well, right? Especially Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely evolving. And at the time at Amazon, I had that sales operations title. She works for a different department, which was still, right now we would say that's still part of sales operations, but somehow, because we're still early days, it felt separate.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. And then you both moved to work at Hootsuite.
Yes.
Was that together? Like, how did that happen? Did you see?
We quit together.
So Catherine began first.
So you
left. I went first.
And did you move into a sales operations role?
I did.
Okay, cool.
It was a sales operations manager role.
First time, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. And then you were dragged over.
Then I said, "Hey, Nia."
Basically, yeah.
And did you join the same team?
Yeah, and this was the first time we were working
actually together and
cool.
actually made sense.
In sales operations?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So let's focus on the Hootsuite experience really quickly, because you joined when they were relatively small.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so how many people were in the business when you joined? And then.
So when I joined, we were just over 30 people.
Yeah. Were you the first sales operations resource or person?
Yeah, for EMEA, yes, I was the first one. So, and obviously, Hootsuite headquarters in Vancouver. So they had sales operations in Vancouver that was managing sales ops for their global business globally. But it was unrealistic. There were only a couple of people, so they actually needed someone who can manage EMEA also, just because the market is totally different. So they needed someone who actually understood and had the sales operations experience in EMEA.
And you always need someone in the trenches who is there with the salespeople working day to day. Having someone in a different time zone is always a very difficult
it's very difficult. Yeah,
because that relationship is so important, right?
It is so important, yes.
Yeah. And on that, actually, we were talking before we went live about the needing sales experience to do sales operations. From what I've heard from the story so far, is that we don't have experience in sales. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I have.
Okay, great.
So before I've joined Microsoft as an intern, I had 2 sales jobs before that. So I'm from Holland, and actually when I was 17, my first role was knocking on doors selling energy in ACO. So that was my first hardcore sales job. And then after that, just when I was in uni, I was working for Nationwide Building Society selling loans and credit cards. So I had a little bit of a sales background when I went into it, for sure.
Yeah. And now?
So like I said before, when I was at uni, I was working in retail and doing that. My first proper working role was doing psychology work. And so I had not come from a typical sales background, having done kind of like sales work.
Yeah.
But I would say that I personally don't think you necessarily need a sales background to be good in sales operations. I do think you need specific skills. I think there are certain skill sets that are needed to be able to do the job effectively. But I wouldn't necessarily say a sales or a typical sales background is required.
Cool.
Yeah. So
do you mirror that opinion?
So my view is a little bit. So I think if you do have a sales background and you go into sales operation, I mean, providing you also have the operational skills and you can do that, right? But if you go into that role, I think you can be the best sales ops out there, because you have to understand those people. You have to understand them in order to be able to do your job. If you don't have that experience, I do think that you still need to go into sales operations role, trying to understand the sales operations, the sales people, right? Trying to understand the sales organization in order to be able to do your job. So that's my
Got it. Moving on, next question. Current tech stack for both of you guys. Are we using, I'm assuming we're using Salesforce. Is that correct for both of you?
We're both using Salesforce,
cool. And what else are we using?
So this question, when we obviously saw the question, and when we were looking at the questions, this question kind of puzzled us, because I don't think it's as important, the tech stack that you're using, but the way I try and describe it is that you've got, and it goes back to my point being that sales operations doesn't just deal with sales people. And so and that's the reason why you can be called business operations, revenue operations, because you're dealing with the business as a whole. And so in terms of the tech stack that you're using, each department potentially will have its own one. And if you think about each department as being a different cog in the broader scheme of everything, each cog needs to be able to turn with each other one, right? And so the different tools that they're each using all needs to be kind of at least integrated or work alongside each other. And so saying that I use Salesforce or using X or Y, I don't think is as important as making sure that the tech stack that you're using all interacts and works cohesively with each other.
Got it.
Because ultimately, if I'm a startup, my tech stack will be completely different to, Jumio, we're an enterprise company. So the tech stack is changing and growing and evolving, right? So as long as it's always working together and you're always ensuring that whatever it is that you are using is benefiting the other departments and is working alongside them, I don't think it really matters.
Got it. So if a sales department had like the ultimate tech stack, but it wasn't talking to the rest of the business, there's
no point, because I think, and what we're definitely trying to do, because Ometria is certainly smaller than Jumio, and so we're just starting out. So we're just implemented Salesforce, right? Now we're really starting to think about, what kind of ecosystem are we building for the business? Because like she said, it's like a cog. It's a entire sales organization, not just the sales team. Every other department adds value to sales, right? So we need to understand, how do we collaborate with each other? What is the information exchange? How does that look like? So, because there's handover between the departments. So we need to have a system that talks to each other. We can't buy in silos. So now what we're doing is we're just speaking to other departments, trying to understand, what do we have today? Does it talk with Salesforce? If it doesn't, do we need to change? And what is the right tech stack?
I mean, it makes our job more challenging because we have to speak to so many more stakeholders to kind of get buy-in, but it makes our job even more important, because otherwise you end up spending all this money on all these different tools that don't know what they're doing and are probably doing similar things, which you always want to avoid.
I love how you avoided answering the question. So can you, going back to tools though, is there one tool that you have used that you thought that's really good? Or does it not matter, because it's what really matters is
no, definitely. There's definitely some cool tools out there that you can use. For us, like I said, we just implemented Salesforce. Now I'm looking at different tools that we can potentially be purchasing and implement or integrate with Salesforce. So I will abstain from saying which tool just yet until I actually have it. But in the past, tools that we've used and integrated with Salesforce, and actually that's one we've just bought, and that is specifically with the CSM teams, and that's Gainsight, which I think is a pretty cool tool to really have that single customer view as well.
We had Gainsight as well. I think it's important, just to be able to get a holistic view. I think any tool that can give you a more holistic view and provide additional data that's relevant, useful.
Good. Moving on to data quality, now you're both using Salesforce. Does this sit with you two, or your team, sales operations, to ensure data quality, or did that sit with the CRM owner or the Salesforce admin?
So, everyone is responsible. Everyone is responsible, right, for data quality.
Equally.
Everybody's responsible for the data that's in the system. In terms of who's responsible for looking after it and owning it, that's our role. We're there to do that. But if anybody's using the CRM tool, anybody who's taking part in the business is equally responsible for ensuring that what they do within the company is providing data that's useful.
Yeah, and I think there is a lack, from my experience and other business that I worked at, is there is a lack of really educating everyone in the business about data quality, data integrity, just data governance, right? So it's creating data governance within your business and making sure everyone is aware of that, for sure. And then, but also having then that data quality control team, which needs to be sales operations or any other dedicated data quality control team you want to have, that can definitely champion it and drive that and make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And on that point, actually getting salespeople specifically to do these things that you want them to do to maintain data quality, how do you do that? It's a psychology question.
I think psychology helps. Understanding that definitely helps. But I think it's about adoption and adherence in as much as anything else, and getting someone to adopt to using the tool correctly or in the way that the business processes require you to use it, is about including them in the process. When you purchase new tools, ensuring that they are, heavy stakeholders in why we've purchased it.
Interesting. So actually going out and asking people what tool they think would be good.
Yeah, ultimately, I the way I look at it is the salesperson is my customer, so I need to ensure that they are happy with what we've purchased, and it works to the needs that they have. Ultimately, my goal, I have to be objective, right? So my goal is to ensure that the business needs are met. So when they're suggesting this tool, this new fancy tool that does this and has these pretty colors, that's lovely. But if it doesn't meet the business needs, then it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but I think there's also, there's something to be said about meeting, doing the right thing for the business. But then also as a sales operations, we are there to support the salespeople because we want them to be as productive. So things need to be efficient for them. So for me, in terms of getting really buy-in, from salespeople, actually, it's quite easy because it starts with them. It starts with them saying on a day-to-day, they are working with different processes, with different tools. They will tell me and voice out, actually, this is not working for me. Why not? Because it's not efficient. It's not fast enough. I'm getting this bug. So actually, from the start, you are making sure they're involved in the decision you're going to make in order to improve things. Yeah. That's where it starts. And then after that, it's just more re-education, right? Yeah. Making sure that the entire business is also bought into that you have senior management that's also bought in, that can drive them from the top. Just getting everyone involved. Yeah.
Okay. But it starts with communicating with the salespeople
100%.
every day.
Yeah.
And that's why Hootsuite kind of needed someone in EMEA when they were growing a sales team, right? Because it's harder to do that if you're on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Got it. You mentioned about salespeople being productive. What are you currently doing at the moment to improve the productivity of your sales teams?
So that one I find it's such a broad question.
Yeah, purposefully.
Thanks. Because it's in different ways, right? So, you can try and get the sales team to be productive from this system doesn't work, right? It creates a bottleneck. That is one. It can also be from a place where, going back to data, well, if we don't have the right data in the system and they have to go out there and call prospect, but they don't have the right numbers, or, they don't have the right elements on an account to understand how to go and move that forward, then that is, a question of, can we, data quality and data enrichment, for example, in order to get them to be more productive. Then you start thinking about, in account-based marketing, for example, or prioritization, which are the right accounts to go after? Should they just call a list of 1,000, or actually one should be prioritized over others? Now you start thinking, how can I do that? By implementing lead scoring. So there's so many ways. It just depends on what the question is in productivity.
Yeah. Can you tell us about one way that you implemented something new to improve productivity?
Lead scoring. That's at the beginning, right, of the funnel.
Yeah. One of the currently at Ometria, so I have implemented lead scoring to prioritize accounts, but I definitely think that we can do so much more with that. And why do I say that? Because in order to do lead scoring, you need to have all the right data elements in there. And right now we're still in a place where we're trying to just enrich information data so that we can have a better, accurate lead scoring, so that we can better,
right?
And that comes with time for sure. So that is one thing that definitely helped, that I can name off now. But I always think there's a lot that we can do to make things better.
I try to ask everyone about the ratio between people in sales ops and number of sales reps. I heard earlier that one sales ops person to 25 sales reps is about right. What do we think about that?
I don't agree with the ratio between salespeople to sales ops members.
Oh, sales ops. Not sales managers. Okay.
Yeah, I think it depends on the the way in which the business runs, how much automation you have. You can have bums on seats who are useless or not useful, productive.
Yeah.
But it's more important to me to have people who are able to provide something for the business. If I've got 5 people, for example, in the US, and then they've got a sales team of 200 people, but I've got, for example, when I was at Hootsuite, and you had gone by them, but it was me by myself, and there was like easily within 3 or 4 different countries, maybe 80 people.
Wow.
So it becomes very difficult, but it's how you learn to manage what you can automate, how you're able to kind of build the relationship and connection with the different sales managers and things like that, and what kind of ecosystem you've got for people that you can rely on.
But I think there's also, when you say, are you talking about specific sales ops hat? Because, okay, let's break down sales operations, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
There are many different aspects of that. So we have the process side of things, right? So optimization. We have just managing the tools that we're using today. So let's just say Salesforce, and then we have Gainsight, and then we have other tools on top of that. We have data and analysis, right? So deriving insights from that and starting to make decisions based on that. Sales ops does that as well. We have enablement. This is another thing to name up, right?
The thing. So many people categorize sales ops in different ways. So you have all the admins, and then you've got all the enablement team, and then you've got people who are actually like doing the deal desk. So like even that categorization.
But that would be, so let's say me, right? So right now I'm alone in Ometria. So I am alone. I'm the only head for a sales operations head.
Yeah.
I will build a team. Maybe not this year, probably by next year or so, right? So what am I looking at? I am then looking at getting people who are more specialized in those areas, because right now I can manage all of them by myself. But as we scale and as we're trying to, we're trying to be, bigger and better. In order to do that, sometimes you do need extra heads to support you with that. So I definitely think it's not necessarily a sales ops to people ratio. It's more about the growth you're going to have as a business, because you can be adding more salespeople, but it's more about the skill. So what is your strategy? Apart from sales, there's other strategies you have around that, right? So it's about what are you doing with partnerships as well, right? That comes into it. What are you doing with customer success? It might not mean that you're adding more people, but it just means,
you've got to think differently.
You have to think differently. You have to do things differently. And that means you have to put some sales operations initiatives against that in order to scale the business. So it's not always a sales ops to people.
Yeah, so in summary, sales ops is more complex.
It is more complex.
We wear many hats.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now I want to move on to, and I think you're going to dislike this question as well, KPIs. If you could only use one single KPI for the rest of your sales operations career to measure individual reps, what would it be?
Again, I'm sorry, you're going to hate me by the end of this.
To manage individual reps.
We couldn't do that, because I don't think reps are measured in so many different ways. One comp plan I'll put together, they have multiple KPIs.
I totally agree.
Okay, that's good.
If you could only choose one, if you could only choose one, which would it be?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's such a tough one, because if you had, because then I'm thinking about the business. I'm trying to derive my answer of what does the business need as well, right? So do I want to track just ARR? So do we just need to track the dollars? Right?
Do I need pipeline to track? Does that mean that I need to then focus on that KPI.
What is the
really
state
does
of your
depend.
business? Yeah. So I find
Okay.
this a difficult question.
It depends on the
Okay.
scenario, unfortunately.
Okay, because a business in two different situations would need a different answer.
Potentially, I mean, I think a business always wants to track how much money you're making.
Okay.
Anyway,
that's a staple.
so maybe if you're asking a question after that, what else do you want to track, or what one thing would you ask?
Okay.
Could be I could think of okay, so let's say average order value, right?
Mm-hmm.
That could be a good KPI. How could we increase our average order value?
Yeah.
Right. So.
But that probably wouldn't be the only one you would measure.
No.
But you told us to pick one.
If it's a big one, I was saying after revenue.
Yeah. Okay. So we made
exactly. Yeah.
We've actually put a line in the sand and we're saying revenue.
Yeah, because if the CEO, what's most important to them? Where's the money? How much have we made?
So that's what you would choose.
Exactly. But then, okay.
I mean, if you had to pick one.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Moving actually back, I think I missed this question out, is bringing new salespeople on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you kind of have like a structured process for them to come on? And how long do you expect from when they join to when they be fully productive or fully?
The ramp-up time can depend. But generally, in terms of ramp-up time, I would normally say probably about a quarter is what I give to fully engage with them. But again, depending on the type of business, for example, if you're a startup, there may not be any process, there may not be any onboarding put together. But what it is, it's our job to work out, okay, there is no onboarding process, but as a salesperson, as our customer, we have to provide them with guidelines that allow them to work in a structured manner to ensure that the business needs are met. So I might have Salesforce training over X amount of days. There may be sales enablement training that they need to go through. They may spend time with marketing. So, and it's up to the business to ensure, and that's the reason why I normally say a quarter or ramp up to kind of fully engage and immerse them in as much as they can. But outside of that, onboarding is continuous. It can never stop, because if it does stop, then they stop learning, the business stops growing. It has to continue. And my team probably hate me for it, because I've got a team of 4 people and I'm constantly having them go back in. We do lunch and learns and we spend time doing like refreshers and things like that. But it's all necessary.
That's
tools change as well, right?
That's really good insight that I don't think we've had yet, is that onboarding should never actually stop, or learning.
Exactly. You have onboarding, and then you have an ongoing training program for anyone else who has been there much longer. After X time, or actually not after X time. I think after you've done the onboarding, you're done with that. They're still going to be trained because you're still learning, right? And I think in Ometria, we're still, I don't think we're structured yet. And we've had these conversations, and it'll be up to me to really structure our enablement program. And right now we're looking at dividing it almost in three kind of areas. So where you have the sales enablement, you have tech enablement. So that's basically products, and also just industry. What does the industry look like? And then we also have just general company onboarding. But when it comes to ramp, it's really different. So when you have, for example, Ometria is just such a more technical sales, right? You really need to understand the workings of the platform when you sell. So there's more that goes into onboarding, but there's also longer ramp time. Whereas when I was at Adobe, it was a salesperson could ramp up, max 3 months, and understand how to sell it, because it was so transactional. Because I was working the SMB part of it, and it was so transactional. So quite quickly, because even exactly, and even the sales process, the sales part of that, how to sell at Adobe. There wasn't much, because it was so short of a sales cycle. You can get on the phone today and make a sale today, right? Depending on what product it was. So I think it just differs by any business.
I have a couple of questions that we're not prepped for. You guys have had 20 years combined experience, so 10 years each. How have you seen sales operations change during your careers?
The name alone has changed. and I think that even creates some confusion when you, for example, if you go for an interview and they'll say, oh, I need someone to do sales ops, but their exact requirement can be very, very different. What they actually need you to do can be very, very different. I think generally, I think more power has been given to us to be trusted, to kind of have the insights and to help be a right hand to, I guess, our C-suite or whoever it is that we're kind of supporting, and to kind of give them the insights to kind of do their job more efficiently and more effectively. And I think when maybe I first started out, that wasn't so much the case. And so now I find myself able to kind of provide more support than I ever was when I first started.
Yeah, for me, what I've seen is, so I just explained to you earlier about the many aspects of sales operations, right? And for example, when I was in Microsoft and I was in the sales excellence team, which was a sales operations team, basically, but we're sales excellent and we supported our partner program managers. Each one of us had a slightly different role, so it was very specialized, right? So, and then you had different other departments, if you like, who would do like business analysis, etc. So over the years, what I've seen is we decided as a society to combine that, because we saw that actually there's a need for each sales operations to understand all the different aspects of that, because they are related. You can't have one without the other.
Which is why it's more business ops than it is sales ops, because we have to understand different elements of different parts of the business to ensure that we can be efficient. Because you support the customer success team and the solutions engineers as well as the sales team. So, you know, you're part of the business, not just the sales.
Yeah.
So then why are your guys' job titles not revenue operations or business operations?
Actually, my CRO calls me revenue operations internally.
It's just the title that makes sense in the world when we first got it. Yeah.
And then the other question was the exactly same question, but how have you seen how being in sales operations or revenue operations being different at all the 10 different companies that you've worked at?
No. No, I would say no, it has not. I don't think it has actually been fundamentally different at all. So apart from, first of all, it was very specialized because, like I said, it wasn't combined. You know, no one said, actually, these are all aspects that needs to be sit with potentially one person, depending on the size, who would manage people who might be more specialized. Apart from that, it's just been an evolution to get into sales operations who wears many hats, but I didn't do different things that I'm doing now. I've just evolved and grew in my role.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then final question, who has influenced or guided you? Who's been like the one shining light each that's taught you the most?
So we talked about this, and it's really hard to get each other. But it's really hard to name, right? Because there are so many people who influenced me, and I'm sure Nia as well, but it's been salespeople, right? It's been CROs, VP of sales, you know, sales directors, that because I had to work closely with them, be their number two, and they taught me so much more about the sales world as well, and what I need to know that would make me better in my role. It has been customer success directors, it has been, you know, products, it has been marketing as well, which has been very influential to me as well, because that's also another department that I need to understand how it works, because it's feeding the team. So how does that work? So how can I optimize that process as well? So it's been so many people in my life, you know, in the last 10 years that have influenced me, and I am here today because I am them.
And I think each organization has been quite different in terms of their growth pattern and their success stories. So none have been the same. So what you've needed from each company or each person that you've had to lean on or kind of have as a support has been very different, or at least it has been for me. So I personally wouldn't be able to pick one person, but I'd say definitely in each company there's been at least one or two shining lights that have kind of been my lighthouse.
True Nia and Catherine style. We have a question here, I believe, or maybe a couple, or maybe we don't. I'm not sure if they're relevant questions. And I'm probably not going to read through all of them. Anyway, so the things I liked, I'm just going to summarize. I liked when Nia said about the salesperson being the customer. I've had people come on before and they said their customer was like the head of sales or was the business. And but actually realizing that you're there to serve the salesperson, which with a nice insight. My favorite point was the point about the tools, because I ask that question every week, right? And I get tools every week. But you guys were like, we can tell you tools, but it's not going to help. It's actually how all the tools work together that's the important thing. And then the final thing has just slipped my mind. I'm sure it'll come back to me. But they're the two big things. Guys, thank you so much for your time, for finally coming in. That was it was a very nuanced interview, and hopefully will provide a lot of thought-provoking insights for the audience. But thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. If you are listening on a podcast listening application, then please subscribe, rate, and review. And if you have any questions about the show, if you know a guest, or if you have any questions about sales operations, just hit me up at tomhunt@ebster.com. That's tomhunt@ebster.com.